Hey, we have been talking about and learning about, or I have been talking about, um, male and female reproductive systems and what those organs look like and the different roles of different tubes and glands are in the reproductive systems. And I just want to take a note to recognize that what we've been talking about is what does the average system look like? In fact, that's been true for all of the systems throughout the body throughout the semester. And there's variation in those systems between people. And that's also true of the reproductive system. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we do have a range in how those systems present. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the early development of the reproductive system and how differentiation occurs between male and female reproductive systems. So after fertilization and the implantation inside of the uterine wall, and that fetus starts to grow and develop, they are considered sexually indifferent in the first 5 to 6 weeks, meaning that if you were to look at that growing fetus, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was genetically a male or a female because they would look the same. And then sometime around week 6 or 7 of development, then sexual differentiation begins, meaning that the organs of each reproductive system start to differentiate into either male or female organs. And then that continues to progress throughout the pregnancy. That's different than sexual differentiation of the brain, which we associate with gender identity and sexual orientation. That differentiation doesn't start to begin until the second half of the pregnancy. And that's interesting to note because you can have different matches of physical sex and brain sex, right? They can be both male, one can be male, one can be female, both can be female. And the reason why there can be different associations between physical sex and brain sex, which would be gender identity and sexual orientation of what we societally think of as normal, is because that differentiation happens in different times inside of pregnancy, and they're both influenced by hormones like estrogen and testosterone. But depending on what that hormone environment is in the womb, can cause different differentiations. So here's what embryo looks like at 5 to 6 weeks of development. So we're at the sexually indifferent stage. And I have to confess, every time I look at this, it kind of looks like a turkey to me. I think it's because of the tail and the little, these will become legs, but they look like little wings to me, more than you need to know. Okay, so what are we looking at? Here are the developing reproductive organs. The gonadal ridge, this reddish thing here, will become the gonads. So they will either develop into ovaries or into testes. And then notice there are 2 ducts here. We have the mesonephric duct, also known as the Wolffian duct, and we have the paramesonephric duct, para meaning next to. And then we've also got these metanephrons, nephrons, right? They're all associated to the kidneys. So these brown blobs here will develop into the kidneys, and then these tubes, of course, will become the ureters. But these 2 ducts are what we're going to be talking about over the next few slides and what happens to them. So for only one of these ducts will develop in each individual, and one of them is going to disintegrate and atrophy and die off. And which duct develops? Well, it depends if you're going to be male or female. But take a moment and look at that, and can you make a prediction about the mesonephric duct and the paramesonephric duct? Meaning, which of these do you think will become uterine tubes, and which of those do you think would be more likely to become the vas deferens or the ductus deferens? Knowing what you know about the male versus the female anatomy right now. If you need another hint, I'll tell you. Think about which system has a continuous tube and which system is the gonad actually physically separate from their tube. There's a break there. Interesting, right? All start so early. So after week 6, we start to get this gene involved called SRY, and it is either present or absent. So let's talk a little bit about genetics. Every human inherits genetic information from 2 parents, a male and a female, a mother and a father, a sperm and an egg. And that sperm has 23 chromosomes in it, and that egg has 23 chromosomes in it. Now, for 22 of those chromosomes, there is a matching pair, kind of like matching socks. They're the same length, they have the same stripes, meaning they have the same genes. So you have 2 copies of each of your genes inside of your body. You've got 1 copy from the egg and 1 copy from the sperm. That is different for what is called the sex chromosomes. So here are the sex chromosomes. Those are a little different. That's known as X and Y. So females have 2 X chromosomes. So females still have 2 copies of every gene. Males are different in that they have 1 copy of all of the genes on the X chromosome and then 1 copy of all of the genes on the Y chromosome. And those genes are different between the X and the Y chromosome. So what makes a male male is the presence of a Y chromosome here. Why is that? Well, the Y chromosome has a few genes on it that are critical to male development. And the first one that gets turned on is called the SRY gene, and SR stands for sex determining region, meaning this is the region of the Y chromosome that's going to determine whether the fetus develops into a female or a male. So without a Y chromosome, fetuses by default develop into females. With the SRY gene, when that gets turned on, then that fetus will develop into a male. So this is the game changer, the SRY gene. So here's a summary. Let's walk through this. So females, XX, they are going to develop ovaries, and they will, we'll talk more, Mullerian duct develops, and they gain female external genitalia, and then also their brain becomes feminized, meaning they identify as, their gender identifies as female. Versus males are XY, they've got this SRY gene. That SRY gene turns on and causes the gonadal ridge to turn into testes rather than ovaries. And the influence of testosterone causes the development of the Wolffian ducts, brain masculinization, that's the brain sex gender identity that gets developed later on in brain development, and as well as male external genitalia. So there's our overview slides, but let's look at this more in detail. So without that SRY gene, we have a female reproductive system that develops. So you can see that the mesonephric duct, also known as the Wolffian duct, degrades, and the paramesonephric duct forms. Remember this one's further on the outside. So now we kind of understand, where does that gap come from between the ovaries and that uterine tube? It's because initially, when we look at these developing early stages in the embryo, that mesonephric duct or that Wolffian duct is really close to the gonads, and the paramesonephric duct is further away. And so there's just this gap that never fuses in the female reproductive system. All right, so that development continues until eventually you have a fully formed ovaries from the gonadal ridges. The paramesonephric ducts become uterine tubes, and the development of the uterus and vagina happens. For males, the opposite's going to happen. So when that SRY gene is present, now those mesonephric ducts, or those Wolffian ducts, develop, and this will become the epididymis. So the epididymis and then the vas deferens. So we have this continual tube between the testes and the epididymis and the vas, what will become the vas deferens. So these were the gonadal ridges in weeks 5 and 6, have now developed into testes. And then that paramesonephric duct, that other set of ducts, atrophies, degrades, and dies off. So that by birth, the male reproductive system has developed. And now we can also see how that circuitous route of the ductus deferens happens, that initially these testes are up here, further up in the body cavity, and that they have to descend over the pubic bone. Okay, so here's our summary slide, right? Everybody starts this way with the presence of SRY. We get the development of testes and the Wolffian duct, or the paramesonephric duct develop. Nope. The paramesonephric duct degrade. The mesonephric duct stay, versus with females, these outer ducts, the paramesonephric ducts, develop, and the inner ducts degrade. Interesting. There's also differentiation of the external genitalia. And we've talked about development of homologous structures before in male and female reproductive systems. And what is a homologous structure? Well, a homologous structure means that it has, they develop from the same tissues or same germ line. No, that's not right either. But basically, the structures have a similar origin. So when we look at things like in the male and female reproductive systems, the bulbal urethral gland in males and the greater vestibular gland in females, those develop from the same origin in males and females, right? And as we just talked about, the gonads, those would be homologous structures, in that the ovaries and testes are both developing from these gonadal ridges. So that's what we mean, developing from the same origin, but one develops differently, slightly differently in males versus females. So let's follow this a bit in the external genitalia. In that, the erectile, and we've talked about this, right? But the erectile tissue in men is the penis. In women, it's the clitoris. But as we've talked about, the clitoris is more than what we see on the external genitalia. The scrotum in men is equivalent to, and it originates from the same tissue as the labia majora in females. So now you know. So as you think about what you've learned about the male and reproductive systems, here's a potential short answer question for you to consider for your assessment in comparing and contrasting the reproductive systems of males and females. Think about, what's the role of the autonomic nervous system? How is that similar, perhaps different in males versus females? Which one, when you compare and contrast, which one has a continuous tube between the gonad and the orifice outside the body, and which one has a break in it? And what are some consequences of that? What's the role of smooth muscle in male versus female reproductive systems? And how are the types of epithelium different? And what are the different roles of the epithelium in male versus female reproductive systems? And And then do you remember where those sex hormones are produced and by what cells in each reproductive system? So remember, in both reproductive systems, the sperm is not producing testosterone, the eggs are not producing testosterone or estrogen and progesterone, but there are different cells that are producing those hormones. So be aware of that and which ones they are. And then, as we just talked about, there are some different homologous glands and structures. So things that develop from the same tissues, same origin, but end up being different structures in male versus female anatomy. That's it.